It is one of the greatest love stories ever told, and one of the biggest war epics in human history. It is a tale of gods and heroes, of the world's greatest warrior, and the world's most beautiful woman. It's the tale of a Trojan horse and 1,000 ships. But how much of it is true? Did the Trojan War really happen? And what secrets lie under this hill in western Turkey? Could this be the great lost city of Troy? It's a modern detective story that unearths an ancient mystery. The story behind the epic. A story of stolen gold, buried skeletons, and crumbling empires. Maybe even more fantastic than Homer could have imagined. This gold treasure is nearly 4,500 years old, and it comes with a strange story that leads to a lost civilization known as Troy. This gold has been stolen, hidden, won in battle, and lost again. Nations have fought over it. Empires have fallen around it. April 1945. These gold artifacts, containing more than 10,000 individual pieces, are housed in a museum in Berlin. But Russia's Red Army is advancing on the Nazi capital. The city is in panic. Museums are looted, valuables are carted off, and the gold vanishes. What happened to it? For years, it was assumed that this gold had been melted down, lost forever. But it wasn't lost. It was hiding. No one knows exactly how, but sometime that summer, the gold was loaded onto trucks and snuck out of devastated Berlin. It traveled east, deep into Stalin's Soviet Union. In secret, the gold arrived here, at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. But it was not for display. Instead, it was locked in the basement for 50 years, until another empire fell, this time the Soviet Empire. In 1993, the Russians admitted they'd stashed the gold. 3 years later, it finally went on display. Now, nations are again fighting over this treasure. Russia, Germany, Greece, Turkey, claims that revive ancient rivalries stretching back to the Age of Heroes. Is this the gold of Homer's Troy, a city legendary for its wealth and riches? The story of the Trojan War is told in Homer's Iliad and continues into his Odyssey. It's been retold in art, plays, and books. It's a story so powerful that Hollywood can't resist it.
The story of the Trojan War is a compelling saga. It has elements that both women and men like. It's a love story, it's a buddy flick, and it's got universal themes. Man's mortality, love, requited and unrequited. I mean, Hollywood's had a fixation with it again and again and again. It's just a story that won't die.
It's the story of two great civilizations, the Greeks under King Agamemnon, and the Trojans, led by King Priam. It's the story of how Paris, a Trojan prince, runs off with Helen, a Greek queen. But stealing a queen carries a heavy price. King Agamemnon, overlord of one of the world's largest militaries, must defend his kingdom's honor. He launches 1,000 ships across the Aegean Sea to get Helen back. The Greeks lay siege to Troy for 10 years, but cannot scale Troy's enormous walls. The most famous warriors, Achilles of Greece and Hector from Troy, engage in mortal combat. Hector is killed, but the walls still stand. Until the Greeks invent a trick. They wheel a huge wooden horse to the city walls. The Trojans think it's a gift, but instead it's filled with Greeks who carry off Helen and burn Troy to the ground. Troy is destroyed, but the story lives on to this day.
There are any number of cliches that come out of the story of the Trojan War, most of which people don't even realize came from there. We have, for instance, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, the face that launched 1,000 ships, with Helen being that face. And of course we have then Achilles' heel.
Homer managed to hit on some kind of eternal themes of humanity. The sacrifices that are required by a soldier to fight on behalf of his land, to follow orders of his king. The sense of strong relationships between men and women, seeing them pulled asunder on the field of battle. These are themes that carry on through the remainder of Western literature.
The story has been around for almost 3,000 years. But is it true? Was there even a Troy at all? Did the Trojan War take place? The Trojan War supposedly occurred 1,300 years before Christ, a time when writing was virtually unknown, and there was no recorded history. It was 400 years before the tales from Troy were finally written down in books, called the Iliad and the Odyssey. They are not history. Rather, they are entertaining fables from another era. Fiction with a dash of historical fact by a man named Homer. But who was he? And did he deserve the credit?
The Iliad and the Odyssey were attributed to a blind poet from Western Turkey named Homer, already in the Greek period. But recent research has shown that we're not necessarily justified in linking the two epics to a man named Homer, nor are we necessarily justified in assuming that he was blind.
Some people have suggested that it's not a person, that Homer is a profession, that one is a Homer.
Whoever Homer was, his story can be mined for clues to find the real truth behind the epic war between Greece and Troy. The tale begins in the late Bronze Age, more than 3,000 years ago, at a lavish dinner between kings and commercial rivals. King Priam of Troy and King Menelaus of the Greek city of Sparta command competing trade routes and are celebrating their new partnership. But there is a problem. One of Priam's sons, Prince Paris, is distracted from his diplomatic duties. The distraction: his host's wife, Helen, said to be the most beautiful woman in the world. But King Menelaus does not notice Paris's infatuation.
Menelaus, who's apparently not the brightest of bulbs, goes off and leaves Paris and Helen alone. Menelaus goes off to Crete on a business trip. And while the cat's away, the mice play.
Helen and Paris meet eyes and fall in love. They begin an illicit affair. Paris takes Helen back with him to Troy.
Now, there were two versions. The Greek version said that Helen had been kidnapped and had been taken away. The Trojan version said that Helen had actually fallen in love with Paris and had left voluntarily. Either way, Helen winds up back in Troy. When Menelaus comes back, he finds his wife is gone.
In any era, taking a queen is a scandal and an insult. In the 13th century BC, it is an act of war. King Priam refuses to return her to Greece. Helen is now kept at the royal court of Troy. But was there ever really such a place? Homer's description of Troy tantalizes.
In past days, men told tales of Priam's city, rich in gold and rich in bronze.
Priam city, Troy, rich in gold. That promise has lured treasure seekers through the centuries. Find Troy, and you will find gold. And that is where this gold comes back into the story. In 19th century Germany, an eccentric businessman took up the hunt for Troy's riches with a vengeance. That man was Heinrich Schliemann. He was obsessed with the Iliad and believed every word of it. To him, Troy, Helen, the horse, were real history. But for hundreds of years, scholars had seriously doubted Troy's existence. To them, it was a fictitious city, an Atlantis, a Shangri-La. Schliemann refused to believe them. A man obsessed, he embarked on a wild quest that became the first serious attempt to find Troy. But discovering the truth about Troy is made all the harder because Schliemann, like Homer, readily mixed fact and fiction. In an age when showmanship guaranteed lavish press coverage, Schliemann was destined to become the archaeological P.T. Barnum.
Heinrich Schliemann is the father of archaeology. He's also a scoundrel. He is almost completely untrustworthy in terms of his personal life, his private life, and therefore one wonders how much we can trust him in terms of his professional life. He's not really a man you would have wanted to invite home to dinner. And at the very least, if you did, you would take his stories with the proverbial grain of salt, if not the whole shaker.
Schliemann was determined to find proof of the Trojan War and make himself famous. But first, he had to get rich. Starting in Russia, he sold arms to both sides in the Crimean War. Then, to finance his search, he turned his eye to gold. In 1849, there was only one place to chase it.
He then went to California in the 1849 gold rush. He was a 49er, but he didn't get his hands dirty. Instead of mining for the gold, he was a go-between, buying the gold dust and the nuggets from the miners and selling them to the banks. Apparently he had his thumb on the scale. And so he was nearly run out of town.
With his newfound wealth, it was time to search for Troy. But before he did, the eccentric Schliemann needed one more thing: his very own Helen.
He engineered a divorce. He then wrote to the head of the Greek Orthodox Church in Athens and said, I want to come to Greece, and I want you to find me a Greek wife.
His interviews produced 17-year-old Sophie in Gastromenos. Greek, young, and beautiful, she became the new Mrs. Schliemann. He had found his Helen. Now, to find Troy. The only question, where? Homer's writings are like a treasure map, full of tiny hints. He describes the Trojan plain as a windy land, dotted with sturdy oak trees, perched on the edge of the ancient Hellespont waterway. This sent Schliemann to northwestern Turkey in 1868, where the purported grave of Achilles lies near the town of Beşik Tepe on the Aegean coast. If Homer is to be believed, Troy has to be nearby. Schliemann then turned to a man with a credible theory of how to unravel this mystery. He was Frank Calvert, a diplomat and amateur archaeologist.
Frank Calvert said to him, you know, on my land there is a site named Hisarlik, and I've been excavating there. I believe it's Troy. Why don't you come and take a look and dig, and if it's Troy, we can work something out.
Hisarlik was not much to look at. Literally a grassy lump, 220 by 160 yards, rising from the flat farmland of Turkey's Anatolian coast. Calvert convinced Schliemann that this unassuming mound in the middle of nowhere was once the cosmopolitan civilization of Troy. Schliemann began to dig where Calvert had suggested, and he wasn't dainty. Believing that Homer's Troy was at the bottom, he carved a mammoth north-south trench over 40 yards wide, straight through the middle of the hill. Schliemann was not patient or careful. If it wasn't about Homer's Troy, he tossed it aside.
If one had to describe in a nutshell how Schliemann dug at Troy, it would be very easy to describe. He dug badly.
At the time in which Schliemann began his work, archaeology was really a very new discipline. We think of it as a very old one, but in fact, in the second half of the 19th century, it was quite new. Schliemann had no formal training in archaeology at the point when he began his excavations, so he wasn't exactly sure how to go about it.
On May 31st, 1873, Schliemann would literally hit pay dirt.
In his own words, Schliemann said, I came out one morning, the workmen were already excavating, and as I walked over, one workman was uncovering a huge chest, and I could see the glint of gold. And so I quickly announced that I had forgotten it was my birthday, Schliemann says, and I gave them the day off on the spot. After the workmen had left, I then called over my wife Sophie, and together we excavated this great chest and associated treasures. My wife gathered up the objects, the gold, the silver, the bronze, in her apron and carried them off back to the house, where we quickly collected them and cataloged them and wrote them up.
Thousands of pieces of gold.